Hi, my name is Jared and this is Horror Obsession. Today, I want to talk about Color Out of Space, an H.P. Lovecraft story starring Nicolas Cage and written and directed by Richard Stanley. Color Out of Space is an interesting movie, and I mean that in a good way. If you watch way too many horror movies like me, lots of by-the-numbers horror can start to feel forgettable. Color Out of Space manages to avoid this, and if nothing else, will leave an impression on you. The movie has many flaws in terms of the story structure, the writing, and the acting, though I think the strengths narrowly outweigh the weaknesses. Before we get into spoilers, if you like H.P. Lovecraft stuff, you will probably love this movie. The production quality is pretty high, the movie is competently shot and framed, the cinematography is good, and the story is engaging enough to make the almost 2-hour runtime go by pretty fast. If you're ambivalent about Lovecraft or don't even know who that is, I would say this is probably a skip. Alright, with that out of the way, let's jump into spoilers. Color Out of Space starts with Lavinia, the daughter in a farmhouse family. The family is kind of dysfunctional, and you never get the sense they are particularly close. Nathan and Teresa lived in the city for years before moving back to Nathan's childhood home, a farmhouse which constantly reminds him of his father who was verbally abusive. Lavinia practices witchcraft and Benny loves computer games, while Teresa has cancer, but is still upstairs in the attic grinding away at her job. Jack, the youngest, wears big goofy glasses and is kind of autistic or something because he acts very odd throughout the whole film. And that's basically it for the characters. There is a hydrologist guy who weaves his way in and out of the story, but the fact he is a hydrologist doesn't even matter. He studies the water and that leads him to believe the water is infected with something, so he goes to town to try to convince the mayor, but is basically laughed out of the room. He easily could have been a biologist or a zoologist or anything else, since he doesn't end up influencing the plot positively or negatively. Another wasted opportunity by the script. So anyway, one day an asteroid lands in the family's yard, which everyone finds briefly interesting, but the asteroid vanishes and that appears to be that. Little does the family realize their problems are only just beginning. As I said before, this movie has a lot of flaws. First, let's talk about the story structure. The movie is paced in a way that is going to leave some audience members bored. There are long stretches where the movie tries to rely on the beauty of its cinematography to maintain the audience's attention, to varying degrees of success. The color they chose is really pretty, and it is especially cool to look at being integrated into the local wildlife. But this cool color out of space is often insufficient in place of an actual story, which brings me along to the writing. There are far too many setups without payoffs, which I think is a byproduct of trying to include too many separate elements. I will admit I have never read the Lovecraft story this is based on, so maybe they just went with the source material, and if that's the case, then I would say all of this criticism also applies to the original story. Let me give an example. Early on in the movie, Nathan goes down to the cellar to pick out a bottle of wine, and the cellar door opens from the kitchen. They make a point to establish this by showing him opening it, and then they show the downstairs being filled to the brim with tons of different kinds of wine. This is a clear setup for later, and my assumption was the family was going to have to come down here to hide from some kind of monster, but the cellar isn't mentioned again until the very end, where it just kind of shows up out of nowhere and doesn't contribute to the plot. Another example is when Nathan takes a bite out of vegetables from the garden and then throws them in the trash in a fit of rage because they don't taste good. Nicolas Cage isn't a good enough actor to make this scene work, since I think what they were going for was Nathan being slowly infected by the color, him having episodes of acting like his father and then returning to normal. The tone of the scene is just way off, mostly due to his poor acting.
Nate, are you listening to me?
You know, I did everything I was supposed to do. I followed every fucking rule in the book. In the end, they still fucking taste like shit. You know what? Fuck that. Okay, coming up! You know what?
Okay, stop it! Stop it!
I mean, he just doesn't pull off the menacing, slow descent into madness like Jack Nicholson in The Shining.
Whenever you come in here and interrupt me, you're breaking my concentration. You're distracting me. And it will then take me time to get back to where I was. Understand?
Additionally, the vegetables are never brought up before or after, so it ends up feeling very random and odd. And finally, Teresa is working a lot and the Wi-Fi goes out upstairs, and Benny is a big gamer, neither of which pay off in a meaningful way. You think, oh, she works from home in an important job, so maybe she has a really stable, expensive Wi-Fi connection that is like wired into the city at great expense. Maybe the Wi-Fi works even when the phones go down, something they can utilize later in the story. But the movie is like, nah, fuck that. We just wanted to show that Teresa is a workaholic. Oh, okay. I think one excellent rewrite of these plot elements is to have the story focus more on the alien life forms, so basically the setting of the excellent film, The Mist, with the color corrupting the wildlife in increasingly destructive ways. So let's go through one possible rewrite of the script, attempting to tie together all these setups and keep the narrative more focused. At first, the color is producing positive results for the family, so maybe before the color arrives, Nathan has a scene where he is disappointed in the tomatoes and peppers from his garden. At the same time, Teresa is at a chemotherapy appointment and is told by her oncologist things aren't going great. Maybe she should start to consider palliative treatment, aka comfort care. Teresa arrives home and shares the news with her family, and everyone is sad and cries about it, establishing that the cancer has brought the family together and they all really care for their mom. Benny is angry and goes to his room to play video games as a means of escape, and then we get the scene where Lavinia tries to cast a spell to cure Teresa's cancer. Jack is too young to really understand, so he gets a speech at bedtime from Teresa about how she will always love him even if she isn't there, and we get a little sappy scene where they hug or whatever. Next, the inciting incident, aka the asteroid hits. The local sheriff showing up and the news reporters can all be basically the same, but there are some changes that would make it a little different. Nathan starts to notice their garden vegetables taste much better, and these pretty flowers are blooming all over. After eating the vegetables and drinking the water, Teresa goes in for her next oncology visit only to discover her cancer is miraculously in remission. The family is ecstatic about all these positive developments when Jack is attacked by the weird alien insect thing. The family starts to have reservations about the color, but overall is okay with it because the positives still outweigh the negatives. The local wildlife is infected, however, and eventually they are attacked by alien deer and maybe even their own dog. Under siege, they try to call for help, but the phones are down. With no other choice, they retreat to the cellar and narrowly avoid getting torn to shreds by the monsters. Thinking they are going to die, Nathan takes out his $5,000 bottle of vintage wine, which he was saving for a special occasion, and the family shares a drink, on the verge of giving up hope, when Teresa remembers her Wi-Fi connection is separate from the phone line, and maybe if they can get to the computer, they can call the police so they can concoct a desperate plan to reach the computer. I don't know if this is a perfect script idea, and I basically just came up with this on the spot, so I'm sure it could use some revision, but the point is, it seems to work more like a movie and not a random connection of scenes loosely bound together by a theme. The vegetables thing has a setup and a payoff, the cancer thing has a setup and a payoff, the cellar influences the plot by giving them a place to hide and pushes the character development forward, the Wi-Fi thing has, you guessed it, a setup and a payoff. This concept is also much more focused, since the actual movie couldn't decide if they wanted to do a body snatcher film like The Thing, an obvious influence based on the extreme similarities between the alpacas being fused together and the sled dogs being fused together. The movie also thought, hey, The Shining is pretty good, let's have Nathan go through a descent into madness. Oh, hey, and also, let's have the landscape changed by an alien presence like in The Mist. With such a scattershot approach, none of these ideas end up being very fleshed out, and focusing on one, in this case the Mist concept, gives the characters and the ideas room to breathe. The Thing, The Shining, and The Mist are all valid approaches to a movie like this, but the concepts lead to very different thematic conclusions, and attempting to incorporate all three ends up leading to nowhere, which is the main problem with the movie. There is a hollowness to the ending, where you don't have the stomach-churning horror of The Shining, the hopeless despair of The Mist, or the unraveling mystery of The Thing. Instead, you have a pretty color and some over-the-top acting, which combined with the cool premise was just enough to make the movie interesting to someone with a terminal case of horror obsession.